What if we tell you that aside from President Traoré and the other leaders of the Sahel, there are other African leaders that do not hesitate to shut down France when necessary? It may seem shocking, but it's true. Recently, the president of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Félix Tshisekedi, took a bold move that embarrassed President Macron and left French diplomacy in shock. The president's action highlights the notion that France's long-standing influence in Africa has eroded. But what move did President Félix take? How did it embarrass President Macron? And what lessons can be learned from this move? Let's find out. The 19th Frankophone Summit, organized for the first time in 33 years in France, brought together dozens of leaders of French-speaking countries all around the world. Not surprising, more than half of these countries are from Africa. The theme of the summit was to create, innovate, and do business in French. The summit is also a platform where the French president can meet and discuss diplomacy with leaders from Francophone Africa. However, the Frankophone Summit took a dramatic turn when the president of the DRC, Félix Tshisekedi, walked out of the summit's heads of state retreat. You see, the president of the DRC agreed to attend the Francophone Summit, which he did. But during the opening speech of the summit, addressed by President Macron, President Tshisekedi observed that President Macron failed to address the ongoing conflict in eastern Congo, which has claimed the lives of millions of Congolese. This failure made the DRC president angry because he believed that the reason why Macron did not address the issue was because of the president of Rwanda. You see, for some years now, the DRC has been experiencing severe insecurity and conflict caused by different armed rebels, one of which is the notorious M23 rebels. However, President Félix is of the notion that its neighbor, Rwanda, has been supporting the M23 rebels to cause havoc in the DRC and fight the government. This notion is supported by the United Nations as well as some Western countries, which claim that there is evidence that Rwanda is truly supporting the M23 rebels by sending its troops to fight side by side with them in the DRC territory. So, for President Félix, for Macron not to mention the conflict is a signal that France is prepared to turn a blind eye to the suffering in the DRC just because it wants to please Rwanda. As a result, President Félix decided that there was no point in him being at the summit, so he walked out of the summit's head of state retreat. But that was not all. The DRC president also skipped a luncheon organized by Louise Mushikiwabo, the head of the Organization of Francophone Countries, the following day. The president's refusal to avoid the summit sent shockwaves in France because it was a clear signal that the DRC was not ready to pander to the whims of France. It's obvious that President Macron certainly did not expect the DRC president to take this move. It's even more embarrassing for Macron because it happened at a time when France is trying to rebuild relations with Africa, given that it has lost influence in the Sahel. However, in an attempt to save face, Macron denied taking sides with Rwanda when he was confronted during a press conference. According to him, France was committed to neutrality and has actively encouraged both sides to reach a peaceful resolution through peace talks mediated by Angola. However, for many observers, Macron's comments of neutrality is just to save face. The fact of the matter is that history has showed us that in every conflict between two African countries, the West has always taken a side, and that side is the one that protects their interest. There has never been a situation whereby the West has been neutral. Rwanda has been a long-time ally of France, so it's not far-fetched to say that the DRC president is right in his assertion that Macron has taken side with Rwanda. The interesting thing is that before the summit began, Macron met separately with the president of Rwanda and the president of the DRC. Although the details of those closed-door meetings have not been revealed, the fact that Macron did not mention the conflict suggests that he has indeed taken side with Rwanda. The DRC president's refusal to attend the summit reveals that there is a rift between France and the DRC. And it's not a good look for France given that the purpose of the summit was to bolster France's relations with Francophone Africa in a time where anti-French sentiment is prevalent. However, President Tshisekedi's decision reflects the growing sentiment among African countries. Since Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso ditched France, a growing number of African countries has begun to stand up go themselves. These countries have realized that it's time for them to begin to pursue their own interests, regardless of whether it would affect the interest of the West. Usually, in the presence of Western leaders, African leaders are usually docile and act as followers instead of the leaders that they are. But this new era is revealing African leaders that have backbone and that can tell the West to sit down and listen. This is why the president of South Africa could take a strong ally of the US, Israel, to the International Court of Justice without any fear. And even though the US threatened to remove South Africa from the AGOA agreement, in response to South Africa's case against Israel, South Africa refused to back down and they won the case. The era of the West being dominant and dictating how things should be done in Africa is gradually getting over. Of course, there are still many African leaders that still pander to the whims of the West, but the few African leaders that are standing up to the West gives the African continent hope. However, even though we applaud the actions of President Tshisekedi, the question is, why did he even bother to attend the summit? Since African countries gained independence, African leaders have spent a considerable amount of time attending summits hosted by a single foreign country or organization. It's either the US-Africa Summit, the Italy-Africa Summit, the France-Africa Summit, or the EU-Africa Summit. What's even more irritating is the fact that these summits are usually held in the host country. The US-Africa Summit was held in the US. The Italy-Africa Summit was held in Italy. The South Korea-Africa Summit was held in South Korea. And once the invitations for these summits are sent out, African leaders are always ready to drop whatever they are doing, pack their bags, and travel out to sit and listen to one leader, like school children. But aside from this, the question Africa leaders need to ask themselves moving forward is, what has been the impact of all these summits? The answer is absolutely nothing. When you listen or read the excerpts of the meeting, you will observe that the host country usually pledges so-and-so amount of money, sometimes in terms of loans and other times in financial aid or even investment. For instance, during the South Korea-Africa Summit, the authorities in South Korea pledged to donate the sum of $10 billion to Africa in foreign aid by 2030. Similarly, during the Italy-Africa Summit, Italy pledged over $5 billion in investment in Africa. However, reports over the years have shown that all these agreements made during a summit between one country and Africa are usually defaulted. Interestingly, Africa keeps its end of the bargain by allowing these countries access to its minerals. But these countries do not remit the financial pledges made. So while they benefit, Africa gets nothing in return. Yet, for some reason, African countries continue to attend these summits. What do they hope to gain, or do they just use the guise of these summits to avoid their responsibility back in their country? Honestly, it's truly baffling. The fact is that African leaders need to understand that Africa is the future because it has both the human and the mineral resources the world needs. This means African leaders should realize that they are in the best position to make Africa better than it has been. African countries need to establish a shared responsibility system of collective representation, where AU members agree to establish an African High Commission for external engagement within the AU structure. This means that 6 to 7 countries should be appointed, and their job will be to handle foreign countries seeking partnership with the continent and relay the collective needs of the African continent. Speaking of collective need, one big issue the continent is facing is lack of unity. African countries are not united together when facing a foreign country. Each African country has their different needs, which makes it easy for the external country to manipulate and influence them to sign agreements that are not beneficial to them. So, instead of going to summits and signing ridiculous agreements that do not benefit the continent, African leaders should focus on solving the problems of their country. The continent is blessed with critical minerals, so there's nothing stopping African leaders from investing in the technology that can foster industrialization. If Africa will ever get better, it's time for African leaders to continue doing the same thing over and over again. Instead of giving out critical minerals in exchange for foreign aid, why not sign agreements that will ensure that these countries build factories in the countries that will create job opportunities and also transform technology and innovation? President Tshisekedi's action is good, but it would have been much better if he had refused to attend the summit from the beginning. What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comments section below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video.